Welcome to Perspectives on Neurodiversity, a podcast dedicated to challenging myths and assumptions about neurodiverse life. I am your host, Christopher Scott Wyatt, speaking as the autistic me. Often we associate attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with struggles and, unfortunately, perceived failures. However, our guest this episode wants us to consider the positives of ADHD and how the traits might be harnessed for personal and professional success. As the CEO of SIEMonster, Dez Rock finds her ADHD a strength, allowing her to see new opportunities and solve complex problems. An entrepreneur for more than 2 decades, Dez offers a positive perspective on her neurodiversity. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Christopher. What a wonderful introduction. I appreciate that.
Let's talk a little bit about ADHD. You are diagnosed as ADHD, and most people see that as a marker of struggle. How do you see it?
So I think the timing, I was diagnosed 18 months ago, April last year. When 18 months ago, let's just say from this moment on. And I am not 20-something years old. I have 20-something-year-old children. So for most of my life, I didn't know about diversity. I didn't know about any of this. So there was it's only now I say that to reference and to bring you to the point that, how I'm perceiving myself is a relatively new view on now that I look back and I think, oh, okay, everything makes a lot more sense. And I think a lot of your listeners who are possibly diagnosed late in life will relate to that as they reflect back on their lives and things make sense. The same happened to me. And so now I can see that absolutely a lot of my success is completely tied into the fact that I am diverse. Yes.
Many of our listeners are diagnosed after or even in conjunction with their children or spouses.
Yeah.
How did you then get this diagnosis as an adult?
I have 4 children. All of them are on the neurodiversity spectrum. My eldest has autism and ADHD. And it goes on and on. So there's variations of all in all 4. So as we were going through, as you can imagine, going through that and knowing that, I didn't know, by the way, my daughter told me that this is genetic. And I said, that must come from your father's side. That's how first thing I said. And there's no doubt that he's on the spectrum too. Like now it all makes sense. So that was one clue, obviously my children and their diagnosis, but also who I was hanging around and who I was finding similarities with were all openly diverse people. And one had mentioned to me that, you might be one of us, and also put that thought in my head. And I dismissed that for a while. When I look back, I think that I'd been called weird and I don't know why I blocked it. I can't even explain to you why. But it was only when I finally opened up, and I think I'm going to get a diagnosis that I now see that absolutely ADHD is there. In fact, I am now 18 months down the track, possibly wondering if there is aspects of autism as well in there too. And at this point, I don't have the time or the bandwidth to go get that diagnosis, and nor do I would accept it if it wouldn't change anything in my life. But let's just openly say that there's a possibility of both with me, yeah. Definitely officially diagnosed with ADHD, yes.
You have taken a unique path into the tech startup world.
Yeah.
For those who aren't familiar, SIEMonster, the initials here are SIEM. And for those who are tech geeks, security information and event management is a very serious way of tracking threats, intrusions, perceived penetrations to a network. This is a world in which we find a lot of people with neurodiversity.
That's correct.
And for a long time, ADHD and autism were even called geek syndromes. So how did you find yourself in that world of high tech when it seems like you took a different path to get to high tech?
Before this, we were running a penetration testing company. So we were hackers, professional hackers. And I don't profess to have the technical part of what is required to create the software. I'm not a coder. I'm not a programmer. I am 100% the leader and, the facilitator and the organizer and, and the negotiator. So I was always surrounded by neurodiverse people. And obviously my co-founders are neurodiverse as well. And it's all making sense now. At the time, it just was what it was. Like, we were all vibing together. That's pretty much it. So when I pivoted and I did drop out of law school, I was late to law, by the way, and I pivoted from there. So my background is management, business management, law, and then now taking on the CEO role, or the role in growing this particular company. And it's all very chaotic, because if you look throughout my career, there's a little bit of this. And I used to be a professional photographer at one stage. And then even at one stage, I was training with Cesar Millan and rescuing dogs for the local shelter at one stage. And then if you go further back, there was all these little things that I was doing along the way, and they all seemed disjointed, and they all definitely had me feeling a sense of shame that I didn't have stick-to-itiveness, that I wasn't like, I used to compare myself to one particular friend of mine who we went through elementary school together and later on, and she knew she wanted to be a lawyer from when when she was, and I used to think, how is that? That was so foreign to me, that she knew this and she did it and she had a pathway and she's been doing. That was so foreign to me, whereas I was chopping and changing my whole adult life, not knowing, not being able to fit in, thinking that there was not quite understanding, knowing that I didn't have stick-to-itiveness, but also not understanding why, remember, pre-diagnosis, and all of this and nothing changes by perspective. So until I realized that each of these paths I took did have something in common. All of them did. All of them had a few things, and I'll list them. They were all problems that I saw that needed solving. They were all engaging to me, as in they were all something that needed me to fix something and to do and follow it through. And they were all involved leadership as well. So whichever one, because I was the president of my law society as well. So whichever one you want to pick, it all had me rising to the top and solving problems and fixing things and getting in there, just really getting in there. So throughout all of that, I built a whole variety of skills that were ideal for entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is, having to do a crash course on QuickBooks over the weekend so you can know it on Monday morning. That's what you do. And I can't think, ADHD brain is 100% wired for that, like if we need to do something real quick, we can definitely jump. I certainly can. I only want to speak for me. I can actually hyper-focus on something and come out knowing more and being able to apply that. So that's the pathway. There's a whole lot of disconnections, and to the point where I even failed high school, right? So you're talking about somebody who failed high school, somebody who didn't. I don't even know how you can fail high school in Australia, because it was VCE and all that. But I literally failed. And so that was a low point. My self-esteem was dead. I had no idea what was, nothing. And then it was just one career path after another career path, never finding a fit, until I realized that my fit is to solve problems. My fit is to where I shine is where everybody else freezes. And that is to be able to think fast on my feet at all times. That's the thread I had throughout all of that. And by the way, later on in life, when I had the opportunity and means to, I went back to university and completed a degree, which is now looking back phenomenal, because we all know that ADHD people often struggle with completion. So I cannot explain to you why I did that, other than stubbornness, pure stubbornness, that I was going to do it, because I wanted to prove to myself, to the world, to everybody, that I wasn't dumb, because that was the other message I had inherited, that I was dumb. And then further to that, I got into law school. Most of the reason why was to prove to myself, to everybody, to society at large, that I wasn't dumb, right? Yeah, so that's a background here.
Your story hits on some points that are important to me. I went back for my graduate degrees because I still to this day remember the teacher who told me I wasn't going to go to college. I wasn't going to be anything.
Yeah.
And that message that you're broken, you're flawed.
Yeah, absolutely. I had that message, yes.
There is a split, and I don't know what it is, between those students I see who take the negative and say, I'm going to prove it wrong, and they might do that in sports, art, academia, and those who give up. I don't know when people ask, I don't know how to say something in me is stubborn enough to say, I will not fail. I will go back and do this, or I will learn this skill. Do you know what it was that made you determined to complete your education and determined to succeed?
Yeah, because I've thought about this too. Like, there have been a lot of people who were thrown far more curveballs than me, or less curveballs than me, who appear to have given up. And, what was the difference? And I think it is the equation, the mathematical equation of the variety of diversity you have. And I always reference diversity as a buffet table that we walk up to with an empty plate and we fill it with certain things. Like, I have aphantasia, the inability to see images in my mind. And I have some other variations as well. So even though I'm only labeled with ADHD, there are certain other things as well on my plate that wouldn't be on anybody else's, right? So it is whatever the variation of my plate is, I'm doing a little mathematical bit, times the trauma that you've lived through, times the genetics, the makeup of the this of who your past is and all that sort of stuff, as well as how much. So there are certain people who go through too much trauma and they do feel broken. So there isn't that sweet spot. But did you know that the most resilient people out there and are the people who have gone through a sweet spot of trauma, but not too much where they're broken, but just enough where they have that fuel, they're constantly fueled to prove themselves to the rest of the world, right? And so that is the formula. It's that sweet spot that they find. And I believe, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the CIA actually has created that. So that's what they look for in recruits as well. So they know that there's this little formula. You don't want to go too far where they're now addicts or they're unable to, they fall off the way, they're not there. But you also don't want someone with a peaceful, happy life because there's no inner drive, apparently. So there's this sweet spot of enough stuff on your plate and the genetical formula to overcome that and not being broken. So then you are constantly fueled with, I'll show you.
I look at my own daughters, and one is driven to prove everybody wrong. She is in band. Well, she's in School of Rock. So she plays guitar, keyboards, drums. She's in swim, even though she has severe scoliosis and wears a back brace. She takes the brace off and does competitive swimming. She is driven. She, a lot like myself, she looks at everything as something to prove to herself, not just others, but she's going to prove to herself, despite the physical challenges and the ADHD and the autism, she's going to do these things. Meanwhile, her sister, a year and a half younger, roughly, when she's faced with the slightest challenge, her reaction is to sit there and just give up. They're both raised in the same home. They are biological sisters. And yet one who I would argue has had a lot bumpier physical experience.
Yeah.
She's just, oh my gosh, give me another challenge and I'll prove I can do it. And the other one, we're still trying to get that resilience. And I know how important it is. So I want to teach her, we're here to support you. You fall down, you get up, you try again.
Right.
And isn't that the key to success, is that getting up and trying again?
Definitely. Fall down 8 times, get up 9. That's absolutely. But you cannot, even though you are talking about all the things that are similar between the two girls, the one thing that isn't is the level of diversity they have and the propensity in order to handle struggles and be that resilient. So it's something that we shouldn't measure. And I always say this because, I'm here on a podcast talking about how I'm successful with all of these, things that are all of these hurdles that I've had to jump. However, I always caution to say, do not compare yourself to me, because no one can be me except me. Absolutely no one can be me except me. So, and I always say to my kids and to everybody else out there that there's a role for everybody in this world. be very careful on how you measure success. What does success look like for you, and whether you're comparing yourself to somebody else's success?
I'm going to ask because it's something that comes up in my classes even. A lot of my students are engineers, computer science students. They want to succeed. They look around and they don't see a lot of female leaders in tech. And for those who don't know, I am currently teaching at Texas A&M. It is a STEM school. It is science. It is engineering. I have some amazing students, but they look around and they want to see people like themselves. So here you are, a woman in high tech with ADHD.
Yeah.
How do you look around for role models that inspire you and help give you a sense of belonging?
I've searched for a role model for too long and realized that I had to be the role model that I was looking for. That's the short answer.
I like that.
So I'm now on this podcast because, remember, this does nothing for my career, really, talking about this. So I'm here speaking up and talking for those 4 children that I mentioned, them. So that's the role model I am for. So I will stand up and absolutely embrace this, talk about this openly, not hide it in shame, because that is the role model to say that, yeah, I have it. Because there are so many people, you mentioned in engineering and all that sort of stuff in STEM, there's a lot of people who are out, and I say that they can talk about their diversity, they're out. There's so many people in other careers that are afraid to come out, and they do contact me when I speak on podcasts like this. So I speak out because of them, for them as well, because what's hiding or having them hide is the shame around their diversity, that, the prejudice that they would face if they would come out. In my industry, it's rare to find somebody who isn't diverse than it is the other way around. But you can imagine in many other industries, that's not the case. You don't want to face that prejudice that would come along with disclosing. And so there is a deep level of shame surrounded by this. And so that's why I'm here. So you're asking for where's my role? How do I look for role models? I've not found mine. So if I couldn't see it, I had to be it.
The challenge in technology, as you said, is that there is a high level of neurodiversity, but it's also a very homogenous industry. Many of the people I know in security are neurodiverse.
Yeah.
And they are open about it. I know several who speak, they promote, they talk about it. I don't want to downplay their struggles, but we are all white men of a certain generation, diagnosed, successful, surrounded by other generally Caucasians, men in tech who code or do what we do. Our industry, when we talk about diversity, we might be neurodiverse, but we aren't very good at other forms of diversity. At least I have not seen the diversity that I hope to see for my daughters and my students. And I think that there is something about the tech industry that does invite and welcome or accept neurodiversity. I can sit and code for hours.
Yeah.
I can solve a problem overnight. I have done 36 hours on a network issue before I left industry and went into education. I just reached a point at 37 where I was done with industry and decided to go, in a different direction and teach. How do we reach out to diversity beyond just neurodiversity? Is I'm looking at this opportunity. I've got a guest right here who I think represents what, my oldest who wants to go into science. That's what she needs to see, is that here are other people who are not just neurodiverse, but they're women. They are people of color. They are different orientations. I think that that's what I want my children to see.
Absolutely. So first of all, I'm going to circle back and challenge the usage of the word Caucasian, because that's a personal one for me. Caucasian is often used as a reference of white, whereas historically it's just a region within the world and has nothing to do with the word white. So let's just park that, but I know you meant white. Secondly, have you heard of the Scully effect? You're of the generation who remembers the X-Files for sure. And the X-Files showed Mulder and Scully. And, this was a woman on TV. She was a medical doctor, and there she was, and every day. Anyway, the follow-on lead, and they call it the Scully effect because the uptick in women who went into STEM because of that show It's now called the Scully effect. You can search it, you can look it up. So I tend to think that we need more representation like that, because we often ask industry to drive, and certainly we should ask industry to drive and hire more and all that sort of stuff too. But also we need to see it to be it, so we definitely need more representation. And even if it doesn't exist, media plays such a large role here. That's what I'm trying to get to. So if we did that, amplified that, and saw more women in tech around us, even on TV, even in movies, that will move the needle as well, if that's what we want to do. If you're looking for role models, we do not get the spotlight and the limelight. No one's following me on social media. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not going to happen. So I'm so busy running a company, I don't have the time to be an influencer as well. So it's quite a hard task to push on to someone like myself. But so having thought about this and knowing the Scully effect, I suggest we try that, like absolutely show more women in STEM, in tech, in IT, in our TV, on our role, like in movies and things like that. Yeah.
I know I have students who have told me that Hidden Figures kept them studying math.
There you go. See what I mean? So that's the same effect.
It's amazing. I hadn't thought about it, but yes, here are these NASA mathematicians that are inspiring a generation of young women.
You see, the fact that they existed, the fact that they really existed didn't move the needle. The fact that media made a movie out of them, and that's what I'm trying to get to. So we've been looking at the motivation and moving the needle completely wrong. You're asking for real people to stand up. That's not going to work. We need to actually show the portrayals on TV and movies, because that is what works. So I'm already going with I'm going with empirical data here. That is what moves the needle. So if we want to move the needle, rather than have a theoretical discussion about the ethics and morality around that, like, you can pick and choose which role do you want to go down. I personally am results driven. Let's move the needle. So let's make more movies, more TV shows where we're seeing the things that we want women to be, or of people of color. By the way, there are so many Southeast Asian people in tech these days. So I question the whole white guy coding these days. Like, that's a rarity in itself. So the younger
generation is definitely showing a greater diversity. And I think that I'm thinking of the rise of international students, even at our U.S. Campuses. We're seeing more and more students, thankfully post-COVID, as they're now coming back too. We're seeing more international students bring in that diversity into our STEM courses. And that's always a positive.
Still usually men though. So still usually male. Again, the only way to move that needle is to basically, like I said, it's the same solution. So women need to see it to be it.
You are a mother.
Mm-hmm.
You're a CEO.
Yeah.
You are balancing a lot of things. And then you have this new diagnosis that might shed light on things. But how have you, with your ADHD, managed leadership role and parental roles effectively?
They're one and the same. The leadership skills that you bring are universal. So if you're a good leader, then that doesn't matter if you're leading a family, if you're leading an organization, if you're leading a religious group, if you're leading politicians, a political party. It's all one and the same. I think that's the misnomer that we have, is that we think leadership is different depending on the different roles. I know that there are people out there who can think of their parents and quickly ascertain whether they were good leaders or not, and whether they would follow in those footsteps. So it's pretty much one and the same. In order to be an efficient and good leader, you must care for the people you're leading, because just making decisions doesn't make a leader. That's not what we want. As humans, that's not what we want. We actually want our leaders to care for us. We want our politicians to care about the people, their constituents. We want our religious leaders to care about the people who they claim are looking after their spiritual growth, right? So same in your family. You definitely want your parents to care about you and your well-being. It's a universal skill set. So how do I manage that? To be honest, my children are all but adults, so there's only one left in high school. I 100% focused in on my family first and foremost before I pivoted to startup. And creating my own family. I focused in on that. I didn't juggle. I didn't do anything. I literally focused in on that. It's only now that they've all got their own lives that I'm now pivoting away. So I didn't try and have it all. I didn't do anything like that. I just built a family first because that was quite important to me for various and, related reasons, then went into this career path.
I took the last 2-3 years, we homeschooled during the pandemic and for the year after. And then we had some issues where we continued homeschooling. So a total of, I guess, almost 3 years of homeschooling. There was an assumption that I couldn't go back into the workforce easily full time. But what I found was that I could present parenting, being the stay-at-home dad, managing the 2 kids, that I could present that as a management case. And I think
Definitely.
I think you're right. I think that is the key, is that it is a management role.
Absolutely.
You're managing the doctor's appointments, the sporting, the extracurricular activities, the enrichment activities. Plus, I was teaching online part-time. But I think reframing being a parent, like you said, being a parent, a good parent is a leader. A good parent is a mentor. And so those are the skills that we want from our business leaders or our educational leaders.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we all know nobody likes CEOs, by the way. You only have to go on Twitter to really see that, and what the working workforce thinks of their bosses. And there are so many people who have gripes with their parents as well, later on in life and all that sort of stuff. It's one and the same. We've been living in a level of dysfunctionality and disconnection between the two groups. I definitely bring my own style to universally across them all. That's why I say the skill set in one absolutely transfers to the skill set in the other. Yes.
My ADHD makes it very difficult to stop something. My kids know it. My students know it. My wife obviously knows it after all these years. You're in an industry that's 24/7.
Yeah.
Security never stops. Everyone's online 24/7. It doesn't stop. Parenting doesn't stop. How do you avoid hyperfocus, which is an ADHD trait, where you get consumed by the tasks?
You can't avoid. I mean, you're asking me, how can I possibly rewire my brain? The answer is I can't. I cannot avoid hyperfocus. I cannot avoid being taken down a road to become, and by the way, I often compare hyperfocuses with other neurodiversities and love that conversation. So we'll welcome that one too. But you can't avoid these things, just like you can't avoid rejection sensitivity when that hits you. You know how we try and avoid it. And I think this is the one thing that I will happily speak up about, is that do not waste time trying to change who you are to fit in, because you cannot rewire something, you know what I mean? You cannot change your diagnosis to be, now you can manage it. You can minimize effects. You can absolutely do this, but can you absolutely avoid them? No, absolutely no. So then I have scaffolding in place in order to help me through those moments. So avoidance isn't the word I would be using in that case, because that means that if I fail, I am a failure. It's a different connotation. So if I fall down the rabbit hole of a hyperfocus and I know I've gone down there, I recognize we're not stupid. We totally recognize what we're doing, right? So now what I do is recognize it, acknowledge it, and realize that this cycle, because we have ADHD, this cycle will come to an end as well. And then this is what it will look like. Much like rejection sensitivity. I don't know if you're affected by that. I certainly am. But, that feels like you're drowning in a wave, like you're standing at the ocean and the tidal wave just hit you. And you feel like you're drowning and you feel like you will never get out of that situation. Doesn't matter if you've had it a million times before. Every time it feels like, this is it. This is the one time I'm never going to cope. That's the sensitivity to rejection. And one of my daughters was talking to me about this when she was having this with her friend, a friendship situation, and she was like, and I'm feeling this. And she has the language to explain, the sensitivity to it. How do I stop this? How do I stop this? She was looking for ways to stop this. And I cut to the chase and said, I think we're thinking about this all wrong. I don't think we can ever stop it. I think what we need to do is acknowledge that this is who we are, that we will always feel like this, and rather put scaffolding around to say, this is when this happens, This is what I'm going to do. And that's what I employ now in my strategies and what I teach my children to do as well. Rather than put the pressure on them to change who they are, I absolutely encourage them to accept who they are and put the scaffolding around. So if she's going through a sensitivity of rejection or type of whatever it is, embrace it. That's what we're going to do. This is where we are right now. Surround yourself by loving, supporting people. Try to minimize the direct impact of putting yourself in situations where this is going to occur, because you know you're going to be triggered, you know this is going to happen. But most of all, accept who you are, accept that this is you, part and parcel, this is you. And it does make for the process it doesn't change anything, because whether you accept it or not, it's still going to happen to you. You're better off not wasting time punishing yourself because it's happening. And rather than just saying, okay, this is where we're at, we recognize this, and have yourself, this is where good coaches and good therapy and good whatever come in place, because they can help you with the scaffolding, with this is what's going to happen and this is what's going to happen. So with my family, we have support people. So when we're in this mode, when this is happening, we have an anchor person that we talk to, and we say, this is what's happening and this is where I am. And this is what's happening. So pretty much talking that person down to say, okay, we've been here before. This is what's never, ever, ever shaming them, minimizing them, telling them to stop, nothing. Just, okay, here we are. I acknowledge this is where you are and this is exactly what it feels like right now. But just like that tidal wave at the beach or that big wave that's coming, it's also going to recede as well. Hold on. And I'm here with you, sitting there. So that's my take on that.
You talked about sensitivity and failure, and we open the discussion with that sense that we sometimes feel like we have not succeeded because there's always this list of things we haven't finished. I'm pondering right now, looking at my academic trajectory, the reality is I chose a bad time, I think, to go into higher education. Not that there's ever a great time, but schools are downsizing. In fact, the school I received my Master of Fine Arts in, I just received an email that they're near financial dissolution or something, possibly a merger. The state university I taught at in Pennsylvania is now part of a 3-way merger with other campuses because of enrollment issues. As you move from job to job, even if I can rationalize and say, I did not cause these economic realities, I still look back and say, I only did a year here or 2 years there. There is that part of me that says, okay, I have this colleague over here who has tenure, who did the 6 years at Syracuse or somewhere, or Virginia, has tenure and is a success because that person has the title associate or full professor, as where I do not.
Yes.
I don't know if that's part of my ADHD, but I am constantly feeling like I could have done better if only I could control myself, if only I weren't so disorganized. I feel responsible, and yet logically I shouldn't be.
No, but you've been made to. So somewhere along the line in your early development stages, right, you've been told, just do it, Christopher. You know what I'm saying? Just sit it, just do it, just finish this, just complete this. That has been manifested into the man now saying, if I only did this, it's still my fault. So you've now projected, you know what I'm saying? You've manifested that, and that's the inner voice that's in your head, which is shrouded with the shame that I'm talking about. We have shame around this. We have shame with the pact. None of what you've said, by the way, is within your control. These are economic forces that are happening worldwide. In your introduction to this particular story, you even acknowledge that, but that doesn't dissipate the shame, internal shame that you found, because the internal shame doesn't listen to logic. And it's been deeply rooted from very early on about a lot of this is just because you're a little bit weird. And so therefore, please stop being a little bit weird. And I am going to double down and say the quicker and faster you accept who you are, the more content you're going to be, because shame is not the motivator that we all thought it was. It is the debilitator. If there's one thing that all us neurodiverse people should look to, like, what should I be doing? Work on your shame. Work on that. That is the biggest hurdle, the biggest rock that you need to move out of your life, because nothing changes but perspective.
I have a colleague who's neurodiverse and has transferred from one major tech company to another. And some of our colleagues say, wow, look at all the places you've worked that people dream of working.
That's right.
And her response is, I haven't been able to hold a job.
Nothing changes but perspective, right?
That you have ADHD, you are broken. If only you had focused, if only you had controlled yourself.
Yeah.
If only you hadn't gotten distracted or hyper-focused or whatever happened,
Right.
you would have had a 5 or 10-year career at Apple or Indeed or whatever.
And what's worse is us parents often, pass on this debilitating shame that we have to our children as well, because that's what we've learned. Like, that is the framework in which we've learned. And so we pass that on. We know all of this knowledge, like we're openly talking about this. We know the limitations. We know that, we know all of this, yet we will still pursue a pathway for our children to just finish, you see? So we're still perpetuating the very damn thing that's debilitated us onto the next generation. So I question, I think we should be a little bit more introspective about that and maybe change tactics, because it didn't work for us. It won't work for the next generation. All we're doing is heaping more generational crap onto them, for starters. So what to do in the meantime? Like I referenced before, there is a world where there is a place for everybody. I often ask this, and I'll ask you too, during the pandemic, what was that for you? Were you calm under pressure, or were you losing what did that mean for you?
I would have to say that Susan and I appreciated the pandemic. My wife is an engineer and technical writer. She liked being at home, telecommuting.
But also so much change, right? So much change, so much upheaval, so much craziness going on. And when I talk to my neurodiverse people, and they say this, I was so calm compared to everybody else around me. This was not the thing that fazed me. And I use that as an example to say, when the proverbial hits the fan, it is the neurodiverse community that holds it together and does what needs to do during that time. That is why the world needs all of us. Because while the world is status quo, the neurobeige are hitting the they're telling us what's right and what's not. Sit still, do this, do that. But when there is an upheaval in history, you study history, in any time there has been an upheaval, the people who get the society out of that situation are the neurodiverse, are the people who say, don't worry, I got this. I know you're sitting there panicking. I know you, whatever, but dang it, my time to shine. And it's us who will get there. And so we become, it's our time to shine. And so this is what I mean when do not undervalue yourself. We are living in a highly industrialized society where there is one path and one path only, and anything diverting from that path is wrong, is whatever, is not success, it's not 10-year tenor, blah, blah, blah. That's all of that conversation. But we live in a world that is dynamic, that stuff happens, like pandemics happen and stuff like that. And Christopher, that's where you shine. That's where you brought a difference into this world. That's where you can do something different, like starting this podcast and starting that. Don't underestimate the stuff that you've done during that crisis time. So again, I say, it's how we frame ourselves with success. It's how we look at the world and what we're using to measure this by. And if we keep measuring it within the standards of the neuronormals, right, we are always going to fall short. Now, if we started measuring it with the standards of a crisis, they will always fall short.
The key here seems to be that you're not measuring success by external metrics.
No, I don't think anyone should. No.
So how does that affect the fact that you're in a tech company? SIEMonster is in a highly competitive field.
Yeah, my competitors are billion-dollar companies. Like, that. My competitors are billion-dollar companies out there. And here I am thinking, the audacity, by the way, the audacity of me thinking I can. By the way, yeah? Because I suspect if I had a far more normal wired brain, I would find this task impossible. Yet my ADHD brain thinks, I reckon this is a great challenge. I'd love to be able to get in there and see if I could. So that's the background on there. But you're right. I don't measure success in the way everybody else does. Of course, I'm very good at my business. I understand business. I know how to run a business. I understand all of that. I think the other key aspect to this is that my identity is not wrapped up in any label, including being a CEO. Yeah, so my identity, and I think this is the challenge we should all do. If you had to introduce yourself and not mention your career, who are you?
I'm lucky enough to be the father to two very great girls.
Great. So the other question is, if you didn't have to, so there's no career, no relationships, like without the connections to everybody else. Now, who are you?
I think of myself as a writer.
There you go.
And people would say, well, that's not your career. It's like, no, but I love nothing more than working on small indie film and theater projects and art. Like you said, photography, I've got a whole closet behind me filled with lenses and camera bodies. And there is something about art.
Yeah, that's another misnomer too. I agree. That's another misnomer that the diverse people don't like creativity. I think we've all been challenged by somebody early in our childhood saying that we weren't creative and it killed part of us. Whereas the truth is that we then later on find in life ways in which to nurture that and find our way in to do that. And so we should, because we're pigeonholed as black and white, especially engineers. You are certainly, that's it. You're pushed into that corner. And so you have to fight against the beliefs that have been held around you and have been imparted onto you. No, I think that the bigger picture, in order to deal with, there's nothing, by the way, having diversity is a blessing, right? It's an absolute blessing. And I refuse to see it any other way. And I know that there are people out there struggling and all that sort of stuff. A lot of these people are measuring themselves in a world that is not set up for them. If they were in a different society, if they were in a different area in which the measuring sticks weren't sit there for a certain amount of time, complete this, these would not be an objective jump. So these are all social constructs that we've all agreed to. This is why I think it's all rubbish, absolute rubbish. And that's what grounds me, I suppose.
And yet in business, you're measured by revenue.
Absolutely. And I have to deliver. But I'm also profusely trained in masking. And part of masking is walking in, learning the game, the art of communication, which doesn't come naturally. So learning the game. And the game is metrics. The game is mathematics. The game is numbers. The game is appeasing your investor or and all that sort of stuff. So I am already profuse at that.
And we talked about the fact that is one of the things that your mix of diversity has, is that you are able to navigate the business environment, the meetings, the one-on-one relationships, the emails.
I don't paint in a picture as like I'm really great at it. There are certain times where I have to run my emails through ChatGPT to make it sound more fluffy, because that's what the other person wants. Hi, how are you? Long time no hear. Hope things are well at your... Like all of this crap that doesn't mean anything to me, right? Like I don't care. But in this world, those are the social lubricants. Like these are the things that matter to that person, because you have to emotionally appease them into whatever it is again, the rules of engagement. So I'm not necessarily the best at it. I often prefer to still cut to the chase. I prefer this fluff and removed out of my life. I have to work with that. Do I get, sometimes do I get burnt with that? I really do, because I haven't done it that day, or I haven't, you know what I mean? Like I still do, because the person, it's interesting that we always talk about the deficiencies of the neurodiverse. I like to flip the script and say the deficiencies of the neuro quote unquote normals, or the beige, like I like to call them, are huge. They cannot see outside of their emotional needs at all times. That always has to be appeased before you can even communicate with them.
I'm trying to avoid saying a whole lot that's on my mind. Part of promotion and tenure, in whether you're talking corporate world or academia, in the corporate world, I was promoted up to a fairly high rank at executive level, because in IT, doing your job mattered. In academia, it's, do you go to the conference? Did you go to that dinner banquet? I can think of no worse form of torture than a large banquet hall serving generic chicken on lousy veg and what.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to those things. I don't want to participate in the social.
But it's the microtransactions and in catering to somebody's ego, and that's their measurement. And to us, to me in particular, that sounds so freaking frivolous and waste of energy. Like if we want to be productive, this whole, especially in the US, we are so production driven. There is no productivity in that rubbish, in my mind, by the way, in my mind. So I find that, again, flip the script, nothing changes but perspective. I can sit here and make a solid argument as why we're the normal ones.
Oh, there is nothing more exhausting to me than all of the meetings and the hearings and the paperwork. And I'm just thinking, whatever the job, as a college instructor, my job is to teach the courses and to do research.
Yeah.
To me, that is the end of it. But there's always this segment called service, which is, how much did you network? How many connections did you make? Did you go to these conferences? Here's, I get a budget to go travel. And I understand that that's part of academia, but I really don't want to get on a plane and go see strangers just to hold their book or my book or what. It just, so there is that part of my neurodiversity that says, why do we do these social things that to me aren't increasing knowledge?
There you go. There you go. So you understand absolutely, because you know that this is you're product driven, you are results driven, and none of this is results driven. This is literally to appease what I think is emotion. Do you know what I'm saying? Literally to appease this rubbish. And what's interesting is that we have to cater for that. We have to bend and fold to cater for that. And at no point do the neuro-beige have to bend and fold and cater for us. And I think that's rubbish, because we bring so much to the table. All I need is one person on my team to hyper-focus on something, and I am miles ahead of my competitors because of that. Yeah?
If I might ask, your way of addressing yourself, Dez.
Yeah.
There is no CEO Dez. You're just Dez Rock.
Yeah.
And I tell my students, especially my former students, you can call me by my name. And then you run into those people. I am Dr. So-and-so. I am CEO of whatever. I am VP ITIS at, it's like, or senior partner. What does the title accomplish? As my brain is thinking, okay, you have just wasted so much of my time telling me how important you are instead of what you can do for me.
But what happens when they, one, lose their job or retire? What happens to their identity then?
That's really a core question that I don't think some of these people could answer.
No, and we know the benefit. We already know that story. They're lost. They're completely lost without that identity, and they have a crisis of sorts, right? And then they go out and buy a flashy red car, whatever they do, or if you're a billionaire, you shoot yourself out to space. That's the going trend, right? No, I don't, because I think that's the benefit of going into a startup at, in my 40s, right? So because I'm incredibly settled in who I am, I'm not a 20-something-year-old who hasn't developed their identity, who hasn't got a sense of themselves or anything like that. I'm not anything like that. My ideal goal is to get back in my RV, my fully kitted out RV, and go travel the world, travel the country, right? And that's it. I already have the RV. So jobs is like nothing changes for me. Absolutely nothing changes. And that puts me in an incredibly, so if I fail, imagine that, because that's the thing. It's like, what would you achieve if that question that they ask, what would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail, right? Because now you're talking about fear. But if I fail, my goal doesn't shift. It's the same goal. If I succeed, my goal is identical to the other, to what it is. That puts me in an incredible, and I don't care what other people think. Clearly, you've seen that. So and I'm a woman in this industry who's apparently, I'm requiring everybody's validation and I don't give a hoot. So that really does put me in I recognize, in a very, very powerful position. Yeah. So when you say, what's it like? I don't care what everyone thinks. Like, I'm not going to sit there and try and appease everybody. Oh, I'm here and I don't really, here I am doing my job. So busy doing my job and leading I don't really give two hoots about what someone down the road is thinking about. Oh, so she's a woman in IT. So is it difficult for, tell me how do other people do? I don't, solve that yourself. That isn't my problem to solve.
I was talking to my daughters and they said, what are you going to do after you teach? And I said the same thing I had already planned, which is, we will go see places, we will go do things, we will have experiences together, because those are the best times together doing something.
Your eulogy, hate to bring it down to a serious point, right? And I always think about this. When we do a catastrophe scale, which was taught to my kids at school, the catastrophe scale, when you feel overreactions and you have, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to you? And where does this particular situation sit in that catastrophe scale? And it kind of like brings it down for you, right? So for me, it's a version of that, but your eulogy. I do not want anybody at my eulogy going, and she was a phenomenal CEO who quarter after quarter increased profits for people that I don't give a hoot about that. Like, that is not it for me, right? So now that set me free. That 100% set me free, right? So what my legacy, or whatever you want, my legacy is my children. That is my legacy. So whatever I impart to them, so they are my 100%. Yes, I'm doing the job I'm doing and all that sort of stuff, but I already know where my priority is. I already know what I'm doing all of this for, and I already know where my identity lies in this. And so how I got there was removing the shame and all of the obstacles in my way, which is what I 100% encourage all of our listeners to do. Yeah, because that's going to clear the pathway for you.
This has been an amazing hour. I have really enjoyed it. You've been listening to Dez Rock. She is CEO of SIEMonster. It's SIEM. So SIEMonster. The perspective is wonderful. I really want people to listen, go back, listen again if you have to. We need to stop blaming ourselves for everything and find our comfort levels and find what makes us content instead of trying to live up to or even down to what the world has told us we are with our neurodiversity. It's a great message. As we sign off here, what do you hope for the next generation of neurodiverse individuals, our children? What do you hope for them?
I can't change the world. So I hope I can change their perspective on themselves. I hope I empower them to believe in themselves and that they are perfect the way they are. That the world needs them just the way they are. That they will find themselves in this world just being the way they are, and not to measure that by anybody else's expectations.
That is such a great message, because I think you can exhaust yourself trying to change the world. And we often think, oh, I'm going to change the world, when really, I just need my daughters to love themselves.
I've spent years on that part itself, because that is phenomenally important for women, or young girls in particular. Yes, I agree with that.
Thank you so much for joining us. I will put contact information in the show notes, also links to other shows where you might hear what Dez Rock has to say. Dez, thank you so much for joining Perspectives on Neurodiversity. Listeners, if you like this, please leave a rating, share this episode. This is a message that I think the world needs to hear, especially those of us who are neurodiverse and suffering from that sense of rejection and failure that we really don't deserve and we need to move on from.
Thanks for having me, Christopher. It's been a brilliant hour.
Thank you for listening. This has been Perspectives on Neurodiversity.